Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Kangaroo Court. It's been a little while since our last video, so hopefully this one is worth the wait. With me, as always, is Tiffany. How are you?
Hello, doing very well, thank you. So
Ha-
glad to be back.
As am I. And has the has the break, I guess, refreshed you, ready to delve into this terrible, terrible woman once again?
Yes.
That's great. That's that's good news. I think it has me too. I think I'm ready to take on Casey once again, and we see her here, looking in happy times in court, charged with the murder of her child. So
Yeah.
I think that's always one of those things where you just can't help laughing, right? And her defense attorney Jose seems quite happy as well. So I'm glad they're so happy. Um, you know, good for them,
I
right?
agree. Good for them. Yeah, you got to see the positive in every situation, right?
Yeah, exactly right. So we've obviously gone through and we've listened to some of the calls and we've kind of gone through a basic wrap of how we got to here because we're as you can probably tell by the picture we've arrived in court. Um, and so what we're gonna do in this episode, and it may be two episodes. I guess it depends on how into the weeds and that we get. But this is kind of the penultimate. Like we're at the court now, and these are the last kind of episodes that we will do on Casey, save for going through some choice parts of her documentary later. Um, and what we want to do is kind of, I mean, the court, the trial was a very very long trial, had a lot of really boring stuff in it. So we're not going to listen to all of it. We're going to have a bit of a look through the overall timeline. We're going to have a look at some of what we believe are the most interesting snippets of testimony. Um, and but what we are going to do is we're going to give you kind of a talk through of the main parts of the trial. So we will definitely miss stuff out, and we're not going to have um, clips for all of this. So if you want to go and fact check us, 100% go for it. But what we'll give you is what we kind of took out from it. So yeah, I think that's it. So we can probably crack into it unless you had anything before we started, Tiffany.
No, I think we're ready to go.
Lovely. So the first thing we wanted to look at is kind of the overall timeline. So I'm going to bring that up here so everyone can see that. So this is kind of the overall timeline from when the final time anyone saw Caylee Anthony alive, through to essentially where Casey was released from jail. Spoiler alert, she's she isn't found guilty, which is pretty much why I've always been fascinated by this case because I find it hard to believe she wasn't. But everyone is open to their own opinion. So June 16, 2008 is the final time that Caylee is seen alive, and in that, so Casey leaves the house. George Anthony, says that he recalls her leaving. Now there is dispute about this that we'll get into in the case, but essentially George Anthony says he recalls Casey and Caylee leaving. Casey says that they are going to Zanny the nanny's house, and who will be looking after Caylee while she goes to work. We know that Casey doesn't have a job, so she doesn't go to work. Um, so yeah, so that's where we are. So the next one is July 15th. Cindy Anthony reports Caylee missing. So essentially, what had been happening there is they've had no contact from Casey, no contact from Caylee. So George and Cindy are pretty much like Kaylee's parents, really. Well, they're doing a lot of the raising, so to not speak to Caylee for one day would be unusual. To not for a month is, completely out of the realms of possibility. So this is where Cindy, I think, gets to the point where she knows that something's up. July 16th, 2008 is when Casey is arrested and charged with child neglect and obstruction. She tells the police Caylee was abducted by Zanny the nanny. Um, Later that day, she takes them for the trip through Universal Studios, where, as we've already covered off, that's all proven to be a lie, and which leads to her first formal interrogation. The next day, on July 17, Casey's car is searched. The cadaver dog identifies the scent of decomposition in the boot. Also in
That's
there,
the trunk.
the trunk. Sorry. I see.
Our American friends.
This is one of the many reasons I need you. So to translate my rubbish into something that our American friends can understand. So brilliant. So let me start that again. Casey's car is searched, and the cadaver dog identifies the scent of decomposition in the trunk. Now, what Casey will suggest is that smell that the dog is picking up, as well as the stain that is in the trunk, is brought about by garbage that she had left in the car. I mean, you can make up your own mind if you think the smell of rotting garbage is similar to the smell of a decomposing body. I don't believe it is, but that's your call. August 27, 2008, an air sample test of Casey's car indicates human remains were present in the trunk. Now, that is something that comes up this is something that is pushed back on heavily by Casey's defense. They kind of try to say that this air sample test that the forensic scientist there does is kind of junk science and that kind of thing. I actually think this is and we'll discuss this more, I think this is a key point that kind of helped Casey and Jose win the case, because Jose does a really good job of basically making this look like just junk science, and I think that had a real big impact on the jury.
Sure.
It'd be one of those things. And another thing that comes up there is that, he also finds huge amounts of chloroform in the trunk, in the carpet, and that they test, and this really forms, the prosecution really kind of hones in on this, and they kind of start their theory that what happened here is that what Casey was doing to put Caylee to sleep was using chloroform, which seems crazy to me. Like, this is another mistake I think the prosecution hones in on. And I won't go into that too much there because we will talk about it later. But it's this kind of stuff where it just lets Jose just poke so many holes, and it's just like, you don't, if you can't 100% prove it, don't mention it. It's yeah, and because what also happens is, what chloroform is also present in is like household cleaners, like disinfectant and bleach and that kind of stuff. So even if you could prove that, even if you could go, yep, we 100% found chloroform there, all the defense has to say, well, yeah, at one time they cleaned the trunk, they spilt something or something, that's why it was there, and you've wasted all this time. But anyway, that's I'm getting sidetracked, which I tend to do, which is probably why this will be 2 episodes. Anyway, you can read the timeline there, so I'm gonna just skip through it now. So October 14, 2008, grand jury indicts Casey on capital murder charges. Casey pleads not guilty. December 11, 2008, skeletal remains are found in woodland suspected to be Caylee Anthony, which later on the 19th is confirmed. And this woodland was like 5 or 10 minutes from the Anthony's house. April 13, 2009, prosecutors confirm they will seek the death penalty. May 9, 2011, jury selection begins. May 24, 2011, opening statements are delivered. Jury, June 15, 2011, the prosecution rests. The defence rests on June 30, and then Casey Anthony is found not guilty of all charges, all serious charges on July 5, 2011, but is found guilty of 4 misdemeanours. Now, the 4 misdemeanours are 4 counts of lying to the police, essentially, which really couldn't be disputed. But in fact, that gets knocked down to 2 charges because the judge believes that, well, let's just wrap them all up together. You lied to the police pretty much from the start, so rather than giving you 4 separate charges, we're just going to say you lied heaps. Here's 2 charges of that, which she gets time served for on, so is basically released 2 days later. Sorry, not 2 days later, about a week later. So she's sentenced on July 7th. She's released from prison on the 17th of July 2011. What do you think of that so far?
That is a lot. It's a lot. Yeah. It's pretty insane, to consider everything that happened for the last couple of years until they finally get to trial.
Hmm.
And it makes sense that it takes some time to get to trial because when somebody is facing the death penalty, the stakes go way up.
Yeah.
And so the defense has to have time to prepare their case. And I'm sure there were many motions that were filed during that time to exclude evidence, things like that. It's a typical thing that I've always heard of.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, it's a lot. I know that this case was very emotional. It still is because Casey is free.
Mm-hmm.
So, so it's difficult, I think, for a lot of people to understand when it feels like the evidence is so clear.
Yes. And that is something that I get really stuck on. Like and at the end, and I guess while we go through, we'll kind of have a bit of a chat about our thoughts onto how the not guilty verdict came about. And
Hmm.
I mean, yeah, I think that's interesting too because I don't think there is one cause. I think everything kind of combined because I don't think you'd see this happen again. Like I think if this case was tried with a different defense attorney, a different set of prosecutors, and most importantly, a different set of jury, Casey's not free. But anyway, I digress.
Yeah, I know it's tough. It was certainly shocking, and while at that time I didn't follow it closely, I was very familiar with it, of course, because it was in our faces every single day
Yep.
as it was going on. But it was shocking. It was the same thing as OJ being found not guilty. You're like, what? It doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem right. But at the same time, when they're finding her not guilty, they're also not saying she's innocent
Mm.
because those are two different things. But just that there was enough failing on the prosecutor's side that they didn't prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yes, and I find it very appropriate that you compared it to OJ because in a later interview that Casey gives when she's because she now decides that she's going to be a private investigator so she can help people like
Right.
her that the that the media have slandered and hidden the truth from, and she actually says something along the lines of I've actually been looking through the OJ Simpson case and I can see a lot of parallels between mine and him. I'm like, great, Casey. Your defense for yourself is to reference another case where pretty much the whole world thinks he did it and got away with it. So
Yeah.
you are a genius. Like,
I know. It's really funny that she wants to be a private investigator too. It's like, Casey, you lied for an entire month about your daughter being alive and with you. And then when your hand was forced to come clean, you still lied. And you had the police going on a wild goose chase to all of these addresses and to find all of these people that didn't exist.
yes,
And you lied about talking to your daughter that same day
yeah,
and saying, I mean, you know, I don't know. That's I think what makes me so crazy about the whole situation
mm,
is that obviously you knew something happened to your daughter the day that she died.
yeah,
You knew what happened because would it be possible that somebody who had nothing to do with it would be lying to everybody and pretending like everything was fine?
exactly. There's
You
no
know,
there's
it's
no explanation for it.
No, not one that makes sense to
Mm,
most people and certainly to most parents
mm,
who, if your child went missing, the absolute panic that would be happening, you wouldn't be out partying with your boyfriend or girlfriend. You would be hyper focused and you would be, just completely losing it
Mm.
over, the fact that your daughter's not here. I think about when Lacey Peterson went missing.
Yep.
And her mom went through such torture not knowing where she was, where she was looking for her everywhere and wouldn't sleep, wouldn't do much else except for talk about her daughter and want to have her out in the media and trying to find. And that's what made Scott's behavior so odd, was that
Yep.
he wasn't like that. He was very, very different in his demeanor over her parents. And so it does, make people kind of think a little bit like, what's going on here? If you had nothing to do with your daughter disappearing, number one, where is she? What have you been doing? What are all of these methods that you say you've been doing on your own in order to find her? And why is that? Why don't you trust, that law enforcement is going to help you find her?
Exactly. And even when she's telling the crazy stories about, Zanny the nanny has kidnapped her and all this kind of stuff, like,
Mhm.
and she doesn't even give reasons there why she wouldn't go to the cops. Like, she doesn't even say, the basic stuff you pick up from watching crappy B movies about child abductions, where it's like, well, I didn't go to the cops because, she said if you get the cops involved, I'll kill her. Like, she didn't even
Mhm.
say that. Like, she made up a
No.
stupid lie and didn't even say the typical stuff that would go, well, this is why I didn't go to the cops. Like, just
I know.
like she thought she was, the guy from Taken. She had a special set of skills that was going to help her track her down. Like,
Right. Well, maybe that's why she wants to be a private investigator, so she can help other parents who have killed their children and then, want to make up stories and invent people.
that
She's
makes a
really
lot
good
of
at that.
sense.
Hmm.
Absolutely. What they say, play to your strengths, and that's definitely one of her strengths. So that might be
Yeah.
the way to go. So the Casey Anthony Detective Agency, coming to
Yeah.
a place in Florida soon.
I know. Yeah. It's very strange how also in the lies that she's told, after the fact, even when she did her documentary, it was yet another story.
Yes,
So, I mean, it's like, why are you putting out stories? No one is going to believe you.
exactly. Like, that's, you can't just lie and lie and lie. And not only lie so often, but lies on top of lies. Like, you tell this
Yeah.
lie, then no, this is it now, and then make a documentary and expect everyone to go, ah, we finally got the truth. Like, that's
Right.
it's.
Right.
But I think she's lied all her life. So I think that
Yeah. No, she has.
Casey does think that. I think she does think that, okay, this is the most recent lie I've told. There's been no further lies on top of that, so people are going to go back and go, cool. We we know we know what happened now.
Mhm. Yeah.
You know, um, but yeah, so that'll be quite interesting to go through that
Mhm.
documentary a bit later. So let's move on now to the. So this is the timeline that's up on the screen. That is the main things that happened. Well, the main things that Casey did during that month between where Caylee was last seen alive and where, um, you know, not Sydney, sorry, Casey was found without her. Are you happy to take us through that so that people don't have to keep hearing my voice?
Sure. So on June 16th, that was the final time that Kaylee was reportedly seen alive. Am I in the right one? Hang on a second here.
So should be the third one that was
Oh, no, I got it. Sorry.
all good.
Um, so on June 16th, 2008, Kaylee was seen alive for the last time. And so Casey was seen on CCTV at Blockbuster with Tony.
And
Okay, so that was the last time. Go ahead.
and no Kaylee. More importantly, we,
Sure, absolutely. Yep.
yeah. And so yeah,
Um,
they rented two videos there, and I guess went and watched them, which is what you do when your child's missing. Continue.
you do. True. So on June 20th to the 23rd, she was partying at nightclubs and socializing with friends. And then also on the 20th and the 23rd, friends testified there was no mention of the daughter. So she wasn't talking about Caylee during all of that time. She was just having a good time. Then on June 23rd, Amy, I'm going to ruin that name. What's her last name?
Hi, Zinger.
Heisinger, okay, is told that Caylee is being looked after by a nanny. Okay, so that's what Casey would have said. And then June 27th, there was a minor car accident. Um, Casey was picked up by Cindy. There was no mention of Caylee at that time. And then on June 30th, again, she was seen at Fusion Nightclub. And then July 2nd, she got a tattoo, La Bella Vita, and that translates to the beautiful life. I'm seeing Caylee missing all over the place here. And then,
Absolutely.
yeah. So on June 3rd to the 4th, she was seen partying again, and she's telling her parents again that she's working. And then on June 15th, Casey's located at Tony's house, and Caylee is reported missing. So all of that time for an entire month, there's no mention of Caylee. She is just living her best life with her boyfriend that she seems to be obsessed with.
Mm-hmm.
Going out to nightclubs, getting a tattoo, partying, socializing with her friends. She had that accident where Cindy went to pick her up, and there was no mention of Caylee at all. All of the phone calls that she was having with her parents, no mention of Caylee. Oh, Caylee is, off doing something else. There's a reason why you can't talk to her. And finally, then on the 15th, Cindy goes over to Tony's house and basically drags her out by her hair. I mean, that's not literal, but
Pretty much.
that's figuratively. Yeah.
Pretty much. And, that led us up to where we started all this with the, because very shortly after that, the first 911 call happens where,
Mm-hmm.
because I think that's, I find, you know, I'd love to know exactly what Cindy thought in that month, because obviously because she's been told a whole heap of lies by Casey, and I'm guessing, she's kind of just been telling herself, even though she probably has doubts that everything's fine. But I think obviously finding Casey without Caylee at Tony's house, like that's the final straw where no, nothing's fine here.
Mm-hmm.
Like something is terribly wrong.
Yeah, they had a rocky relationship.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's definitely not out of the realm of possibility that she was holding Caylee and not letting her mom talk to her,
Yep.
simply because she was mad at her for reasons, right?
Exactly. And
Yeah.
I, I think a key part into what Cindy's mind frame would have been, and also what potentially led to the death of Kaylee is the day before, so June 15, the day before Kaylee's last seen missing, like they by all accounts had a huge fight. Like they did fight a lot, but like
Hmm.
according to Lee and a friend of the family that Lee confided in, like this was the worst fight they've ever had. Like it got physical.
Hmm.
And it was basically, Cindy was like, you can't live here anymore. We're going to take Kaylee, all this kind of stuff. So it was,
Hmm.
so for in terms of Cindy's mind frame, like at first she's probably not thinking. She's probably thinking, well, she's keeping Kaylee from me to punish me.
Hmm.
And by the same token, my personal belief is that it's this fight that triggered Casey to take the actions that happened next. And you can dispute
Okay.
what the actions were, but yeah, I think
Sure.
that was kind of like um, Casey realised the gravy train was over. Because and it's interesting because you'll hear a lot of people say, oh, Casey was such a great mother, and all this kind of stuff. Well, she wasn't having to do a lot of mothering, and I'm not putting young parents down that may have the grandparents and that heavily involved, but I'm it's easy to be I really feel like Casey was more the fun aunt than the mother. So,
Hmm.
we're going to go over here and hang out with my friends, and they're going to have toys for you, and we're all going to have fun. But then we go home, and mum and dad look after her while I go and get high with Tony, or I go out partying, all this kind of stuff. And so I think, we find that that's all coming to a head now. But once again, I'm skipping
Yeah.
ahead.
No, I think also it's difficult to conceive, and I can't either, that a parent would kill their child
No.
and then, dump them in the woods. I mean, but we hear a lot about those stories every single day, where, a mom may decide that she's going to kill her children, so she does. And it doesn't make sense, and we can't understand, just from a rational mind, and trying to look at Casey and say, "But she was always good with Caylee."
Mm.
They seem to love each other, and, so it's difficult to put those 2 together
Yep.
and say, "Yes, that's what we were seeing," but something happened that Casey was aware of, where her daughter was no longer alive, and yet she kept lying about it and lying about it.
Exactly. And you can never understand exactly what people's motivations are and that kind of thing. So all like especially in criminal cases, and that all you can do is judge people by the evidence that there. So
Mhm.
Casey can say she was distraught, or she will like, because what she says in the documentary is that the reason she did all this crazy shit that acted like you know she was partying and just living her best life while her kid was missing. She says it was a response to trauma. Like, that's fine, you can say that, and everyone does respond to trauma differently, but you've also got to account for all of this other evidence there. You can't just say, well, I was traumatized, and people go, oh, okay, don't worry about it. Seemingly that's what the court did, but reasonable people can't do that.
Mhm.
So we now come to the court case. So uh, we do have some about 4 or 5 kind of little video excerpts that we'll watch as we get to there, but I think we'll start just kind of talking through what happened in the court case. Um, so essentially, yeah, you obviously have your opening arguments, and so in the prosecution's opening arguments, oh, sorry, I did want to say something before, so just put a pin in that. Um, what one thing that I think contributed to maybe what happened with the jury's verdict is the way the jury was actually engaged. So um, Jose Bias appeals that Casey isn't going to get a fair trial in I forgot the actual part of Florida they're in, Orlando. Um,
Mhm.
but instead of what they usually do there, that they would take the trial to another part. They actually get the jury in, and they bring the jury in from another part of um, Florida, and they're sequestered, so they've got to stay there for the entire stay, which I mean, personally I think contributes to that, because and they obviously have picked from jury members that have said they're not aware of the case. Now, I think with the way that went off there, and all the information that was out there due to Florida sunshine laws, if you could honestly say, I have no awareness of this case, then you're probably not someone that has any interest whatsoever in the court system, or you're probably not someone that watches the news. So whether or not how informed you are, and because I do think that is a real I think what is a lot of times unfair for juries is you're having um, people that are not involved in a court system, that are not involved in forensics, that kind of stuff, and you're just giving them all this information and asking them to make a decision based on that. And I think you're now dealing with people that have no interest in that, because I honestly don't know how you could not have heard of it. Um, so either you're lying when you say you haven't, or you're just a different kettle of fish, I guess.
Yeah, certainly could be. Now, was it specifically people who had never heard of it before? Is that who was decided to be on their jury? Or is it that you've never heard of it before, or that you can also disregard what you've heard before and only base your decision on what you hear in court?
Yeah, I'm not from what I heard, it was they had said they hadn't heard of it, but yeah, but
Okay.
that is a good point though. And the other thing I think that I feel like you get a jury that potentially don't want to be there. I mean, there was in fact one jury member that intentionally talked to reporters and had that known because he went and talked to reporters. He told everyone
Mhm.
that he's just done an interview, and so the judge hauls him up and says, basically, is this true? And he says yes. And the judge asks him, did you do this so that you'd be dismissed from the case? And he says yes. And when he is asked, um, you are going to be dismissed now, and he actually had to pay, I think, a $4,000 fine. And the judge
Mhm.
asks him, do you have any other thoughts on this? And he says, no regrets. So I think that explains. I mean, obviously that's just one juror, but
Yeah.
I think a lot of jurors looked at this, looked at all the media attention, the fact that they'd have to be away from their families for so long, and they were like, this sucks. So I think because, as we'll talk about at the end of this, the jury decision was quite quick. I can't remember, but I think it was, 10 or 11 hours or something, where
Mhm.
usually I mean, typically, that's what you would see when a jury is going to side with the prosecution. Like, it's that time to kind of, if you've got to overturn a potential murder case, you've got to spend a lot more time deliberating that. Typically, from what I've
Mhm.
seen. Um,
Yeah.
so I think they just wanted out of there. Which I'm not saying I blame them, but I do think that you have a bit more of a social responsibility there if you are going to be, you know, picked on a jury.
Yeah, I agree. Obviously, it was a big disruption to their life,
Mm.
to be picked. I mean, I would imagine, though, that they would have been made aware that they were going to be sequestered and how long they expected the case to go.
Yeah, and I would imagine so too, and that's what I don't understand that mindset. Like, if you don't want to do that, just um, I'll just be in there saying, are you across this case? Absolutely. I've watched every moment of it, and I can tell you she's guilty.
Mhm.
And so just do
Oh,
whatever you do
sure,
to get
yes.
yourself dismissed. Don't go
Yeah,
through with
no,
it.
there's a lot of ways that people find, to get out of jury selection.
Yep.
Definitely. I don't trust the police, that's all you have to say.
Exactly.
You know, you can say a lot of things like that, and they're not going to choose you.
Yep.
So,
Exactly.
yeah.
So yeah, so that's essentially how the jury was pulled and that kind of thing. So we obviously get to our opening arguments. Now, the prosecution's opening statement goes for hours. I think 2 hours or something like that. So much so
Mhm.
that they had to they had to have a break in between it. 2.5 hours actually, from what I've noted down. So I think that, and because I guess what I'm wanting to do while we talk through this is kind of point out the things that we think may have contributed to the not guilty, and I think that's one thing. I think you talk for that long, you're gonna have people tune out, and a lot of what the prosecution just talks through that month like we did before, but in great detail, like every single day, what. And I can understand the point that they're trying to get across, like trying to really labor out her child was missing for a month, and and she'll do it. It was something that Nancy Grace copied a lot when she did it. But basically, the prosecutor would be like, on Monday, Casey is seen on CCTV here. Where is Caylee Anthony? And like that's
Mhm.
what. And like I get the idea, but I just wonder, was that too like. Does the jury just kind of tune out of that, and any kind of great points that you're making are missed? I'm not sure. What do you think?
It certainly could have. I mean, I think that people can zone out too when they're just being
Ex-
talked to
exactly.
for so long. At the same time, the opening argument and the closing argument, the judge will always state, that, what the attorneys say, that's not evidence.
Yep. Yep.
So the decision isn't made based on what they're saying. They're just telling you in the opening what you're going to be expecting. Here's the evidence that's going to show this and that. And then also, for closing, kind of wrapping it up.
Mm.
And, presenting it that way. But even when there's objections that are made, the reasons for the objections and what the rulings were, that's not evidence either. It's just strictly the evidence that is shown, and also what is said from the witness stand.
Yep. So we have a clip here, like it's a it's a short clip of the prosecutor's opening arguments. So we'll play some of that just to kind of give an idea of what was happening. So here we are. Oh, that can go away one sec.
On Monday, June 16th, Cindy Anthony goes to work, as I've described, sometime between 7 and 8 a.m., and is out of the house until the late evening. Until the early. George Anthony again has to work the 3 to 11 shift and is up early, had breakfast with his granddaughter Caylee, and noted that his daughter Casey began to get ready for work around noon, shortly before. George Anthony specifically recalls that at 12:50 p.m. on June 16th of 2008, his daughter Casey left the residence on Hope Spring Drive with Caylee Marie Anthony. Caylee was wearing a pink shirt, jean shorts, sunglasses, and a backpack. And George Anthony, kissed his granddaughter goodbye and never saw her again. In fact, no one but Casey Anthony ever saw Caylee Marie Anthony alive again.
See, I find it interesting that, like, Casey's shaking her head there. Because, like, you can't disagree with that. Like, no one did see her. Like, we know that you didn't, because we know that you weren't with her after this point. Do you know what I mean? Like, like, it's just like she's putting on an act, I guess.
At this point, is she still sticking to the story of Zanny?
So no. So at this point, so essentially, and that's a great. I'm glad you brought that up actually, because I was wanting to, because the story changed so many times. I was wanting to kind of go through where we are now. So yeah, at first, and then while she's in jail, she's the whole time she sticks with that it's Zanny the nanny. So that story changes after she engages Jose Baez. So what the story is now, and the story they will tell now is that Caylee drowned, but it was an accident. So essentially, their story is Casey was at home asleep, and George bursts into her room and says, where's Caylee? Yelling at her, all this kind of stuff, and she's like, I don't know, I've been asleep, rah rah. And anyway, he leaves the room again, and then 5 minutes later or something, he comes up to her, holding Caylee. Kaylee's dead and dripping wet, and he claims that she was in the pool and drowned. So their story is that Casey and Caylee were asleep. Caylee got up, let herself out of the house. Now, they have a heavy glass door to get out to the pool area, but they claim that she obviously opened that. They had an above ground pool, and so to get into it, the ladder would have to be up.
Right.
Now, Cindy previously had always said that they were so routine about taking that down. So they had swum in the pool the night before, with Caylee. And, you know, everyone in the family say, you know, because that was the only way that Caylee could ever get in the pool, and they're worried about drowning, that kind of stuff, like religiously, people would check over and over that the ladder was down. They had always claimed the ladder was down, but when Casey decided to change their story, Cindy started to say, you know, because even in all of this, Cindy is still Casey's biggest ally. You know, perhaps I had forgotten, perhaps it was up. So essentially their story is that Caylee had drowned, and then George covered it up for Casey, essentially. So they contend that, you know, he then took Caylee. He told, because Casey started freaking out, and George said to Casey, look, don't worry, everything will be okay, I'll handle this. And so they then contend that he obviously takes Kaylee's body, dumps her in the woodlands, and that kind of thing. And, you know, that, like, their story, and this is the best story they could come up with, and it doesn't, even to, like, the smallest amount of inquiry, it doesn't stack up. So you're dealing with George Anthony, who he is an ex-police officer. He, you know, and so you're, like, he knows, I mean, he's a police officer in Florida, which, from my understanding, the biggest cause of death of children in Florida is drowning in pools. It's much the same as it is over here, like very similar climates, so pretty much everyone has a pool. So, you know, he would have seen, you know, accidental deaths in pool. He is going to know that from a legal point of view, you know, this has happened, it's an accident. They call the police, they investigate, prove that it's an accident. No one is facing any criminal charges. The absolute worst case is, you know, you might get like a misdemeanor or something, but really you're dealing with a case of a young mother who is devastated, they've lost their child. They're not going to put, do you know what I mean? Like a cop would know, well, everyone would know, you don't cover this up to make it look like a murder, like, or you don't just try to cover it up. It's an accident. It's an accidental drowning. It's tragic.
Absolutely.
You know, you're also dealing with a police officer that he knows that, you know, if you were trying to cover up a murder, you're not going to bury the body in a very shallow grave 5 minutes from your house. Like, so this is, you have to try to, if you want to believe that George Anthony, and now when we get, and this is the thing, this is where it changes again, when, close to present day, when Casey does her documentary, she claims that basically George murdered, so it was a drowning, but George murdered her to cover up the fact that he was sexually assaulting her.
Right.
So, but like, you've got to, so that's how the lie changes again, because she can't even just leave things be. She can't go, okay, I've lied about this, I've got enough, I'm just going to disappear. She needs her, I believe she's you know, she's quite narcissistic. Like, she needs the public record to be, I am the victim here. Rather, like, anyone in her situation that essentially got away with this would have gone, I'm gone. I want a new name. I want nothing to be seen of me in public again. But she needs to try to write the record and throw her father further under the bus than they already do in this case. But yeah, and other things, like you have to, because as we know, when the car is found, George says to the guy at the impound lot, and he says to the police as well, it smells, you know, it smells like a dead body in there. So if you believe that George helped, like, this was an accident, George helped her cover it up, he buried the body, why would he be saying things like that? Like, he would be saying it smells like a dead body because he is implicating himself then. If he is going to cover it up, he wants this to be not investigated. He wants it to be, like, so he would either be saying nothing, could be saying, like, you know, if the tow truck driver was like, gee, that smells like a dead body, be like, what? No, that's garbage. That's the smell of the garbage. Kind of like what Casey did, you know.
Right.
But anyway, so that's essentially what their story is, because my take is that Jose got there and you know, Casey said, oh, it's zanier than anything. And I mean, Jose is a smart guy, and he's a good lawyer. No matter what you think of, you know, this kind of the job he does on this defense case. He's very good at his job, and he said to her,
Mm-hmm.
100%, we say that, you're going to jail. But you're potentially getting the death penalty. So why don't we
Mm-hmm.
come up with something else?
Yeah.
So that's essentially the story that they're saying now, I guess.
Okay. Yeah, I was curious. I couldn't. It's changed so many times, and I was curious. I just couldn't recall what they were walking into court with, as their excuse.
He-
So that's what was making me think of it. She's shaking her head like, no, I wasn't the last person to see her because Zanny saw her alive.
yes. And
You
and by
know,
that and by that reasoning, I guess that's why she could be shaking her head now, because she's saying, no, George was the last to see her
George
alive.
did, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that does make sense there. So I'm glad you asked that, actually, because I completely forgot where we were in this bundle of lies.
But it is also performative, though.
It is definitely, and
Because she is in front of a jury at this point.
yeah,
So they'll be, yeah.
a lot of what she does is performative, and that's where you see in the documentary too. Like, it's very
Mm-hmm.
similar to this. Like she is a good actress. Like she
Mm-hmm.
can pull it off, I guess.
We've already shown you the last photographs taken of Caylee Anthony. The next time a photograph is taken of Caylee Anthony is on December 11th of 2008.
And I think here we're definitely, you could give her the benefit of the doubt before, where in, either in her mind or in what she's trying to tell people, she's shaking her head because no, George was the last. But you can't dispute that the next time a photograph was taken of her was, when she was found, like her
Mm-hmm.
remains were found, but she's still shaking there. So I don't think there's too much more of interest to look at in this clip. It's just really around, I guess, her reaction to all this, and to me it feels very, very forced, but whatever. So then obviously, the prosecutor continues, and then it's the defense's opening statements, and much like we just discussed before, so the defense contends that it was an accidental drowning that George helped cover up. And one thing that Jose says in his opening statements is that he essentially blames the forensic pathologist for the fact that they can't prove that it's a drowning. So essentially, they're like, "Hey, we're telling you it's a drowning. We can't prove that, and it's all the forensic pathologist's fault." Because what he claims is that the way you can test to see if someone is drowned is through diatoms. So diatoms are stuff that exist in water, and they're found in like bone marrow and in your liver. And so essentially you could go, did someone drown in this? So what I should say is when you've only got kind of bones and stuff left, that's how you can kind of test for it, because obviously you can't see the condition of the person's lungs and that kind of stuff. So they should have taken a sample of the pool at the time, and so that then we could test against, and if they had the same diatoms in them, you could say, yes, Caylee drowned in this pool. But I mean, that's a load of crap, because when they find the remains, all that's left is dry bones. Like, there is no bone marrow, there is no liver to test against. So try to say, oh, gee shucks, we really could have got to the bottom of this if the forensic pathologists did their job. It's bullshit. Like, it's just trying to throw in front of the jury, the state are just working against us here.
Right.
So there one very interesting thing that Jose Baez says in his opening statement is he levels sexual assault allegations against George on Casey. So we're going to listen to a clip of this in a second, but I find this phenomenal that this was allowed to remain in, and B, that it didn't, like, and this is one of the things, like, I feel like any other jury, this would hurt them, because he mentions this is the only time that Jose Baez mentions sexual assault. He gives no evidence of it. And, you know, I've listened to some other podcasts and stuff on this, and in particular one where, like, it is two lawyers that host this podcast, and that's what they, you know, usually a defense attorney would be caned for this, because if you say something and you don't prove it, a jury is going to go, well, I don't trust you. You know, you haven't, and this should be a huge thing. If you're saying, because what he tries to say is that it's the trauma from the sexual assault that leads to Casey doing all this weird shit. Like her out partying, it's a response to the trauma from that. You know, it's all this kind of, like, that's so you're telling us, because really, as a jury member, if I put myself in a position there, my biggest concern is that you didn't behave like someone that believes their child is missing. Like, you know, you behaved like someone that their child was a burden. That burden is now gone. I'm free. I'm partying. I'm getting high with my boyfriend, that kind of thing. So you explain to me how that is the case. And essentially, Jose is saying this is the case. You know, people, you can't tell how people react to trauma. So you might look at this and go, oh God, if my child was dead or my child was missing, I would never behave like this. Case, you know, everyone responds differently to trauma. So proving that she was sexually assaulted should be a huge part of your case. So usually the jury would go, you've given me no evidence. You were just trying to slander someone. I'm going to hold that against you. But in anything, it seems to work in his favour. Like, there's so many oddities in this case, I think, is what my point is.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know, you know, I'm not a lawyer. I don't understand the law to to the extreme, but I'm surprised that the judge didn't strike this, or even the prosecution didn't move to strike it. But perhaps because it's opening arguments, because I think you can, like, you don't need evidence. Oh, you said before you don't need evidence in opening arguments, but it seems crazy to say this. So let's watch, shall we?
Yeah, it is crazy. It's not considered evidence, you know.
Yeah.
So the fact that he said that isn't going to mean anything as far as what's to be considered.
Yeah.
But what you don't hear, what you didn't hear, is that Casey was an excellent mother. She took care of Caylee. That child never went without food, without clothing, without shelter. You won't hear a single person come up here and testify how she was neglected or abused. There's no broken bones. There's no trips to the hospital. There's no moment that would help you determine that this child was abused or anything but loved by all members of the family, especially her mother. The photographs that Ms. Drain-Burdick talked about early on, they were all taken by Casey. Casey adored her child. And you'll see photographs.
But, like, I mean, okay, I understand why this is an opening argument, but, like, just in terms of, like, so what? Like, there's a lot of people are a great person until they're not, you know? Until they, like, murderers before they commit their first murder aren't a murderer. Like, and I don't think anyone's claiming that she was neglected or anything like that. And it's interesting because he mentioned, you know, she took photographs of them. Like, yeah, like all mothers would. And the reason I find it interesting, because one of the opening things in her documentary is, like, they're sitting there looking at a photograph, and there's, like, you know, I was here, you know, when she did this, like, they're colouring in something. Like, I was here when she did this. Like, yeah, okay, you're her mother. Like, no one's claiming you weren't around. Like, I don't know, it's just like the very minimum of something it needs to be used as evidence. Like, you can't say anything better than she was always fed and clothed, and I took pictures of her. Mother of the Year.
Mm-hmm.
I certainly don't believe she could murder someone.
Yeah, I think what he's trying to do is establish that there was, this is so outside the norm
Yep.
that if it doesn't make sense, then it probably doesn't fit, right? So
If the glove
she
doesn't
was,
fit, you must have quit, right?
that's very true. And they did. Um, so, um, but that's what he's trying to establish as well. Like, you're not going to hear anybody go up there and say that she was neglected.
Yep.
So there wasn't any type of abuse that was happening prior to her death.
Mm,
So it doesn't make sense that she would be the one that did it.
true. Well, you've convinced me.
All right. Well, case closed then.
All right, guys. We'll see you next week for a different case.
Of her room, of her life, and you'll know that this child was loved, but not for a horrible tragedy, a common tragedy. Are we all here today? You see, this family must keep its secrets quiet. And it all began when Caylee was 8 years old and her father came into her room and began to touch her inappropriately. And it escalated. And it escalated. What does a sex abuse survivor look like? They wear a scarlet letter. They have a tattoo on their forehead. We could all be sitting next to a person who's a sex abuse survivor and never even know it. These things are kept quiet. And these ugly secrets slowly will come out through this trial. A little bit of a sign here, a sign there, a sign here. And you'll be able to know and see what makes Caylee Anthony behave the way she does. Why did she act as if nothing was wrong? She didn't run. She didn't move to California, New York, and say to her parents, sorry, you're never going to see your granddaughter again. That's the easiest thing to do. Instead, she acted as if it never happened.
Well, she doesn't have the money to do that.
It never even happened.
Right.
You hear stories of this Zanny the nanny. It's true. For 2 years, she pretended she had a job and pretended she had a nanny. Is that normal? Is that what normal people do?
Yes.
They get dressed up. They pretend that they're going to work. They have fake emails from work.
It's crazy.
Well, there was a reason
It is.
behind this. Something's not right here. And anything Caylee could do to protect her child, she did.
Except
Including
not murder her.
living a lie, making up a nanny, making up a job. That's what Caylee had to do to live. She wanted to
Why?
live. She forced herself
What?
to live in a world.
What is he actually meaning here? Like, why did he have to? She do all that to live?
Because she was afraid.
What
She was living in fear from
of
her
more
father.
sexual assault if she doesn't have a job or something?
No. I don't think it's that. I mean, there was mention before about, being worried that he was doing the same thing to Caylee.
Yeah.
Um,
But wouldn't you want to not be in that house then? If you're concerned that your father that raped you and you think might also be raping your child, would you not want to be living in that house? Would you not? I mean, they not babysit. I mean, they were with Caylee more than Caylee was. So
right.
if you were concerned about that, why are you doing that? Like, it's counterproductive to your apparent trauma.
It is. I think that also, well, she couldn't move out. She didn't have a job.
Mm-hmm.
So she didn't have any money to be able to do that. So she had to stay. I think that because, well, according to what he's saying, that because of this trauma that she is stating that she experienced when she was younger, that made her make the decisions that she was then making. So it created, um, I don't know, I guess you could call it like a delusion. It means that she's not going to act in the same way that
Normal.
people would say is normal.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. And it's because of that. And it's interesting. I'm thinking back, because the defense attorney for Jodi Arias also believed that she was sexually abused
Uh-huh.
when she was a kid. But he never brought it up because there's no evidence.
Yes, and that's exactly why I think in normal circumstances this was backfire, because as he's not going to bring that up without evidence, because he
Mhm.
knows that the prosecution and potentially the jury could hang him for that. Like, you're if you can't prove this, you're most likely lying. So I mean, it was a bold move of Jose to do, but and I just find it phenomenal that it didn't actually backfire, because I mean, as evidenced by, I don't think many other defense attorneys would do this.
Mm-hmm.
That she wanted to, not the one she was thrust into.
So I'll pause that there before we go on to another clip of Jose, where he is in what's the word? Like, he's questioning George. So because this is where so George's first what's the word? Examined by the prosecutor, who asked him about if he did sexual assault Caylee. So I believe that is this clip. I apologise if
Okay.
it's not.
Most importantly, you're going to hear evidence.
No, it's not. So I'm out of order. So one second. Here we are. This is the clip I was thinking of. So so this is the prosecutor asking George Anthony about whether he sexually assaulted her, because now that Jose has put that on the record, they've obviously got to address it.
Yes.
You told us about the conversation with Caylee and with Casey. What happened?
I went out. Like generally like I did when I could see them seeing Casey going off to work, and walking out with Caylee and seeing Caylee getting placed in the car, getting buckled in her car seat. Just a normal type stuff. And I did. I'd blow her a kiss and say, "Joji, I'll see you later," and she'd blow a kiss back and give Casey a hug. I just told her, drive safe, make sure you come home, not too late. Just normal father, grandfather type things to do.
And did you see them leave in a vehicle?
They left in Casey's car, which is a Pontiac Sunfire.
That's a white Pontiac Sunfire?
Yes.
Did you ever see Caylee again?
I've never seen Caylee since June 16th. I haven't seen her since.
Now, Mr. Anthony, I need to ask you some questions about something else. Have you ever sexually molested your daughter, Casey Anthony?
No, sir.
Have you ever committed any sexually inappropriate act with or in the presence of your daughter, Casey Anthony?
No, sir.
Were you present in your home when Caylee Anthony died?
No, and when I heard that today, it hurt really bad. Because if I would have known something would have happened to Caylee, we wouldn't be here today.
Now, let me just ask you a couple of questions. When you were a law enforcement officer, were you trained in CPR?
Yes, sir.
Oh, stop
Is there
shaking your
any extent that you would not have gone to save Caylee's life?
I would have done everything possible, humanly possible, to save my granddaughter. If what was stated prior would have happened, I would have done anything I would to save my granddaughter.
Did you dispose of the body of your granddaughter
No, I did not.
Did you obtain duct tape from your shed or garage and place it over the nose and mouth of Caylee Anthony?
No, I did not.
Did you have any role or any knowledge that Caylee Marie Anthony died on June 16th, 2008, prior to recent revelations?
No, sir. I never had any duct tape. I never knew of anything that happened to Caylee until our life started to unfold on July 15th, 2008, and when Caylee was found on December 11th.
All right. So we'll just pause there for a sec.
So,
You see,
Going to go back to the next one I want to listen to. So yeah, so I guess, you know, people can make up their minds if they believe George there. What's your takeaway from just by his body language and that about whether do you think he did sexually assault her or?
I don't think so. Just because I don't believe what Casey has said.
Yes. Yep. I'm the same.
Yeah, I mean that's the problem. With the entire thing, any story that she has to tell at this point has changed so many times that I don't believe certainly a claim that she's made, and have him be responsible for her death, for Kaylee's death. That doesn't make sense to me either. Like you said, he was a police officer, and not that police officers don't do things, because they certainly do. But in just, disposing of her body, he wasn't acting in any other way either. He wasn't acting differently. So it's difficult to believe. So if I were to be looking at this and say, who do I believe? I believe George at this point.
Yep.
Just because everything else that Casey has said has turned out to be a lie.
Yep, exactly. No, I agree. And there's no evidence, and there's no attempt to show any evidence about it. Like that's the other thing. Like it's clearly like, I just think it's clearly just there to try to taint the jury against him, and I think that's pretty diabolical. Like, I understand defense attorneys; it's their job to do whatever they can to get their client. Well, whether you want to say whether it's justice or to do everything they can to defend their client. But I mean, you would have to think there are some kind of boundaries where, like, we're just going to slam people with we're essentially going to call this guy a pedophile because it'll help me get my client off the case. I think, I think this kind of stuff that gives defense attorneys a bad name, but it is what it is.
Yeah, it certainly can, because I think a lot of people, when viewing a trial, are going to see the state as good, and then the defense as bad, because they're sitting next to somebody who is alleged to have done horrible things, right? And so they think, well, obviously you're going to help them. You're trying to help them not get in trouble.
Yeah.
But what's really important for him to do is to scrutinize all of the evidence that's provided, because he has to, number one. Otherwise, if she were to get convicted, it would be an easy appeal.
Definitely.
If he didn't do his job. So, it makes sense that he's going to scrutinize every piece of evidence that's out there. But also, if he doesn't have evidence to the contrary, meaning if Casey had told him, I know that I told you before that he abused me and he was responsible, but that's actually not true, then he would not be able to move forward with this at all, because he would be committing perjury himself, and he can't do that.
Yep.
So, because there's no evidence that is stating that it didn't happen, it's just like I know I go back to Jodi Arias so much, but it's because that entire case is like in my brain,
Yep.
with reading from the prosecutor and also the defense attorney, like their books,
Yep.
and so there was stuff going on with Travis Alexander too, where Jodi made a claim that he was a pedophile,
Yep.
that she caught him, doing things and was looking at material. And she made this claim, which obviously is going to make people very, very upset.
Mm.
But at the same time, she's telling him that this happened and he doesn't have evidence to the contrary that it didn't.
Yep.
So they had that ended up getting brought up.
Yep.
Which was obviously difficult for everybody, but that's what she said.
Yeah. No, that you make a good point there. Like that's their duty. I guess I just think it's like it's crazy that the jury believed it. Like I guess I feel like this jury that like Jose did more work than he needed to. Like I think in some cases he could have just got up and said, you know what, guys, awful lot of serial killers around,
Mm-hmm.
and they probably would have gone, well, that is true. There are a lot of serial
Mm-hmm.
killers. Maybe that's what happened here.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, because I mean, it's just to be able to say this, and that it was obviously taken, and because you'll hear, and actually we will get to a clip of one of the jurors that kind of did an interview on the news, and she kind of says, oh well, it was hard to believe George, like, got really creepy vibes off him. Like, fucking oath you
Mm-hmm.
did, because the defense attorney said he's a pedophile. Like, that's pretty
Mm-hmm.
creepy. So if you believe that, it's going to taint everything you think about George's testimony. Anything he says, if you believe he's a pedophile, you're not giving him any credence. You're just sitting there going, you dirty fucking pedo. You're not, like, you know what I mean? I just think that's crazy that you can do that. I guess I think it's crazy the law allows you to do that. But Jose's allowed to do that. So good for him. So, sorry. I'll
You're all fired up.
yeah, I'll get back on track. So the next clip we have is Jose is cross-examining George, so notably here he doesn't mention the sexual assault at all, which you would think that if there was any validity to this, he would be wanting to press George on this. But what he does do is kind of talk about some George's suicide attempt and also a potential affair he had. So let's watch.
Now, most importantly, you're going to hear evidence that while at this public supermarket passing out flyers of his missing granddaughter, George Anthony met a younger woman by the name of Crystal Holloway. They became close. They started dating, or they had an affair, whatever you want to call it. He then began going to her house and visiting her. And on one day, before Caylee's remains were found, her name is Crystal Holloway. Here's a photo of her.
Oh, and I do apologise. Sorry, this is not cross-examining George. This is
This
the
is still his opening.
but it is where he talks about the alleged affair and suicide attempt. So my bad.
And they began to carry on this relationship. This is the woman in the circle looking over at George at Caylee's memorial is Crystal Holloway. Right around that time, George Anthony sent her this text. Well, he has denied and will deny on this stand that he ever had a relationship with her. But he couldn't get...
I do find this I don't know if funny is the right word, but when George is asked about this later, he says that this message here, because Jose puts it to him like, you were clearly having an affair, judged by this. He's like, well, she was a volunteer helping us look for Caylee. I needed all of the volunteers in my life. Like, okay, George, but you're not
Right.
sending that to one of the, James, who was volunteering, saying, thanks so much. I need you in my life. Like, you,
Yeah, that is a stretch, George.
you've just got to
Yeah.
cop to it. Like, clearly you
Right.
were having an affair, and like, I mean, that doesn't make you guilty of what they're suggesting you did. But yeah, you're not sending that to all the volunteers.
Get
Yeah,
around.
they're just trying to destroy his credibility.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, obviously, because this is long after Kaylee died.
yep,
Him having an affair has nothing to do with her death.
exactly.
They're just trying to make it seem like he doesn't tell the truth.
Yep, yep.
Yeah.
And that's exactly right, and that's why really, I mean, George is in a really difficult position because he needs to either cop to having an affair, on TV with his wife in court and that, or but if he doesn't want to hurt the case, he needs to cop to it because they're going to go, well, you're clearly lying. So if you're lying about
Yeah.
this, what else are you lying about?
Yeah.
The guard at the gate where she lives in. Because that woman saw him coming and going many times at her home. And Crystal Holloway will tell you that one day they had a conversation, her and George Anthony. And George began to break down and cry. And she asked him, what happened to Caylee? And he said, it was an accident that snowballed out of control. This is before Caylee was ever found.
Now, just on this, what George will claim is that what he actually said was, like he started crying and he was said that I have to believe it was an accident that spiraled out of control. In other words, he believes that Casey is responsible, but he can't believe that she did it on purpose. So, in terms of this evidence, you've got to make up your mind as to what you believe.
Right.
But yeah, that's what he's kind of said.
This is while he is out passing out flyers, asking for donations.
And I will just add to that this Crystal Holloway, that's not her real name. She's had to change her name because she's previously been convicted of multiple fraud charges. So I guess adding that into
That's interesting. Okay.
I think it's fair to add that into the mix when you're deciding, which person you'll believe. And she sold this story to tabloids and that kind of stuff.
Sure.
So, but yeah, just putting it all on the table.
To help find his
Interesting.
missing granddaughter. George Anthony carried around this guilt for many, many months. It got to its breaking point on January 22nd of 2009 when he decided to try and take his own life. Fortunately, he was unsuccessful and the police found.
Now that I believe is a Freudian slip right there.
You think so?
I think so. I mean, he could have just stumbled over his words, but I think it's very
Yeah.
interesting that he's, unfortunately, because he probably believes that because it'd be a lot easier to make this case if George was dead and there's no pushback. You can just be all, yep, George found it, George buried it. What do you think, George? Is that right? Oh no, you can't say anything because you're dead. So I do think he thinks, unfortunately, he was found. But
All right.
Found him. And we never got the answer in his suicide note. Again, a lot of...
and this is something I find really interesting because he did try to, after Caylee was found, he did try to take his own life because he couldn't, and that's what his suicide note says, they basically said, sorry, Cindy, I can't can't live without her anymore, and Caylee, you know, I'm coming, I'll see you soon, basically. Now, if so, what Casey and Jose want everyone to believe is that, you know, this was an accident, Caylee drowned, and George, you know, after originally being mad, when, you know, saw how upset Casey was, and he's gone, you know, father mode's kicked in, so he's like, I'll take care of all of this, you know, I'll go and hide the body, all this kind of stuff. And so Jose is trying to say that basically he was overcome with guilt, and that's why he killed himself. So, but he did leave a note. Now, if you're this, you know, father that has gone and you've hidden the body of your granddaughter to save your daughter, who is now on, you know, on trial, possibly to go onto death row. If this was all the truth, surely you would expect to be in that. Like, he could, I guess what I'm saying, if he's this doting father and he just wants to get Casey out of this situation, he's probably gone, look, you know, this is no point ruining two people's lives, so I'm going to hide the body, I'm going to lie and all this kind of stuff. Well, here's the perfect out. He's going to kill himself. In that suicide note, you say, you know, blah, 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 goodbye to everyone. Casey's completely innocent. This was an accident. I hid the body because I didn't want another life being ruined. I'm so sorry, everyone. So if George is the one why is that not on the suicide note? Like, and I guess, you know, maybe you could say, well, he was just overcome. He forget this, but I'm just thinking, like, you can save your daughter here by admitting to the truth, you know, before you take your life.
Yeah, and that would explain the reason for him doing that too.
Exactly.
You know, I can't do it anymore. I didn't tell you, you know, at first this is way too much for me.
Yep.
And I can't live with myself anymore.
Yep. And that's another thing that just this doesn't stack up.
Right,
Insinuations,
exactly.
a lot of roundabout talk, but no direct answers, no concrete answers as to why he has all of this evidence, all of this information, and isn't telling anyone. I want to be clear about something. Absolutely 100% crystal clear about it. We are not, nor will we ever, say that George Anthony killed Caylee.
Well, Casey,
or that he had something to do with her death. and the reason's simple. It's not true. It was an accident. And despite how easy it is to point the finger and say there's something sinister here, and maybe play on your emotions, the fact of the matter is, this is an accident that snowballed out of control. This is not a murder case. This is not a manslaughter case. This is a tragic accident that happened to some very disturbed people. People with significant issues, unresolved issues.
So we were seeing.
Okay, so, where are we? Just going to close that for a second.
Mm-hmm.
So now I guess I just want to go through some of the key evidence now. So they get into the forensic evidence. So as we kind of mentioned before, they in the car, both George, the tow truck driver, and Cindy at first claimed that the car smelt like decomposition, or as Cindy said, smells like a damn dead body in there. Cindy will then go on to later claim that what she only said that to basically get the police to come to the house. So when she was trying to get them to come to the house to, you know, look into where Caylee is, she felt like they weren't moving fast enough, so she said it smells like a damn dead body in there, so they'll be like, whoa, dead body, we got to get straight there. So I don't believe her. I believe she
No.
said that because as a nurse who has smelt decomposition before, that's what she smelt. But,
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you say that there's a missing 3-year-old,
yes,
that they're going to move pretty quickly. I
exactly
mean,
right.
they arrived when they were on the phone.
Exactly. So they were already moving pretty quickly. And I
Yeah,
don't,
of
I don't
course.
think they needed the additional prod along. But I mean, Cindy will do or say whatever Casey needs her to say, essentially, which she's kind of proven time and again. I mean, Cindy still talks to Casey now, like all these years later, after all this, after the documentary where Casey says that George was both molesting her and Caylee, without any evidence. Cindy still talks to her, so I think that shows where Cindy is. So as we kind of talked about before, they look at the air samples about the chloroform, and that's in there, and I think this is something that the prosecution kind of shoots themselves in the foot about, because the defense basically says, well, they're cleaning products. We never claimed that the trunk wasn't cleaned, but
Yeah.
like cleaned previously, obviously not clean to clean up the dead body. But in fact, and in a lot of ways, I think that would have been because there was evidence that it was tried to be cleaned up. And then it leads to they introduce evidence about searches for chloroform on the Anthony computer. So it said the prosecution say that the phrase chloroform and how to make chloroform was searched for 84 times in the days leading up to Caylee's disappearance. Now, there's two interesting things here in the fact that there was an error with the program. So it was only one time that chloroform was searched for. So they had to admit that there was an error there, so it was only one time. But they can say that at the time that search was made, Cindy was at work. She was clocked in at work. But Cindy gets up on the stand and says, no, it was me that made that search. The dog had eaten like some leaves or something and was sick. And so what she meant to look up was chlorophyll and, obviously to see what treatment they should give, but she accidentally typed in chloroform. So I don't know what the truth is there, but all of this, I think it is all this ambiguity that doesn't need to be there. But that's interesting. And what is the most interesting thing about this? So this search was done on Internet Explorer because that is what Cindy used to search, was Internet Explorer, as what a lot of older people at that time probably used. But what wasn't introduced, because the prosecution didn't get the evidence for whatever reason, is some internet searches that were done on Firefox, which most people Cindy and George's age probably don't even know what Firefox is. But who does know what Firefox is and who did use Firefox all the time is Casey. And the reason people know that she used that is because, on at the same time that these kind of searches have been made, and like in those, like the other searches on Firefox are things like, nightclubs and different dresses that Casey is looking at to help Tony get for the barmaids and stuff like that. So it's clear that Firefox is what she used, and what has been searched on there, which the searches were done at 2:50 on the day of Caylee's disappearance, which is 10 minutes before they know George was at work, because he clocked in at 3 o'clock at work, were two searches, one being suffocation and the other being foolproof suffocation. But that was never introduced in court, which is astonishing to me, because that is pretty much the death sentence for Casey there, as far as I'm concerned. You've got George 10 minutes before George, we know George is at work. You're searching suffocation, foolproof suffocation. Now, when that is brought up in the documentary, what Casey will say is that, I wasn't the only one at home. So she's essentially suggesting that George made those searches, which even if you want to give her the benefit of the doubt, makes no sense, because that's not something like, if you're looking to obviously murder someone, you can't do this in essentially she would have to suggest that he looked up foolproof suffocation. It's gone, boom, this is how you suffocate someone. So he's gone and suffocated Caylee, disposed of the body, and gotten into work in 10 minutes when the drive to work is 10 minutes. So he has done all this in about, and that's not a search you're going to do. Oh, oh shit, I'm running late for work. I will just look up how I'm going to murder my granddaughter later. Then I'll go to work and I'll come back and do it. Like, it's just not. It doesn't make any sense. It's
right.
just ridiculous. But in any case, that's what's said. And so the other key bit of forensic evidence was some human hair that was found in the trunk. So it was a strand of human hair that was consistent with Caylee's hair colour, and also they can tell that it was never dyed, where both Cindy and Casey have dyed their hair. And the really interesting thing about this is it has what's called a post-mortem banding on it. So essentially, it's a band that the hair gets where that only occurs after death. So they can tell that this hair left the head prior to death. So
Okay.
and that was introduced, but
You mean after death?
what did I say?
You said pre.
Shit, sorry.
Before.
Thank you. I did mean after death. Once again, this is why you're here. And so then the next thing is about they talk about Caylee's remains. So Caylee's remains were found on December 11 at 2008 in a wooded area near the home. So the forensic pathologist ruled it a homicide. Only bones remained. However, given what I was going to say is one of the key things they found there is that the skull was found with 3 pieces of duct tape around it. Now, and this is essentially how the forensic pathologist came to the ruling of a homicide, as there's no reason that a skull would have duct tape around it if it wasn't if it wasn't a homicide. And further to that, the reason that the pathologist came to the conclusion that it was wrapped around the skull is that the jaw was still in place, and it couldn't, because the jaw is held in by ligaments. I mean, this is just, I don't know this. This is just what has been said. Like, I'm not a doctor, but essentially it's held in by ligaments, and once they would, those ligaments would decompose, the jaw essentially falls off, which I guess is why if you see a skull like that isn't intact there. So for it to remain in place, there would have had to been something holding it there, which is the duct tape. So the defense counter this by having Werner Spitz, who is a bit of a hired gun in the forensic space. Like, you'll see him a lot of high profile cases he'll be on. Like, he was also the forensic expert in the the staircase murder.
Yes. Michael.
Yeah, Michael's. Michael Patterson? No.
Michael Patterson.
God damn it.
What's that?
Um.
Alright, hang on a second.
Bear with us, guys.
Ian Peterson. Yeah, it's Michael Peterson.
Peterson. Oh, so close. So close. He popped up there, but essentially he said that, this is this is a swamp. That duct tape could have come from anywhere, and furthermore, there was no fingerprints found on it, so we can't, it's likely wasn't, no DNA on there, so there should have been DNA on there if it was wrapped around Kaylee's mouth. But it's a swamp. Like, I don't think any fingerprints or DNA would survive on that. But that was what they put up there. And as Jose says in the case, he doesn't have to prove anything. He just needs to poke holes, and so that is what they used to poke holes in that.
Well, I think that's a horrible explanation.
Isn't it?
Yeah, it's horrible. Obviously, if the tape is around the skull, then how is it that it just kind of arrived there by, it floated from somewhere else,
yes,
and landed on her perfectly, so that the jaw could be held in place. I mean, I know that the standard is beyond a reasonable doubt, right? So that's what you would be considering when you're thinking about a verdict, is, did the state prove it beyond a reasonable doubt? But if we were to hold that explanation, could we say that is true beyond a reasonable doubt? No, absolutely not. I mean, that's horrible. That's a terrible explanation.
It is. Like, and I just, you put yourself in the position of the jury. I can't understand how you buy that. And that should be one of the things where you're like, okay, this is the best you've given me. Like, I'm knocking you down a peg, and, but yeah, they seemingly believed it. And it's interesting you bring up, beyond a reasonable doubt, because we'll watch one of the jury interviews shortly, and kind of what they say in there, I don't think they understood, what that meant. I think they were more thinking, beyond a shadow of a doubt. Like, essentially, if the defense can give me any other alternative, like, then I can't find her guilty. Like, which is crazy, but I believe that's the standard that they were suggesting, which that's the prosecution's fault for not making it clear to the jury what they're there to do and what they need to apply.
Yeah, the judge gives instructions to the jury and explains, what it is that they're tasked with doing. They are the finders of fact.
Yep.
So they're the ones who are going to determine, is that evidence that I believe? Is it not? Is the person who's up on the stand, do I believe them or don't I? So, they're the ones who are going to determine what's true and what isn't. All that the state is going to do is provide that evidence. And then if defense is providing evidence, that's what they're going to do as well.
Yep.
So certainly, I don't know what the jury instructions were here in this particular instance, but that's usually something that should be included.
Yep. And that I haven't been able to find kind of a clip of the specific jury instructions, but you would have to assume, they would have been instructed on that, because that's the key part of what their deliberations are.
Yeah, exactly. And if the judge is providing clear instruction, then it will say, it's not about finding, no doubt, that you have to be like, yeah, it's 100%. That's not what it is. And that could have been what this jury was looking at too, just like you said, that if there's an alternative, that could be like, oh, well, maybe that happened.
Yep.
Where they would say, well, I can't find her guilty in that case, because there is, I believe it. I believe her to be guilty 99%, but there's that 1% that I'm like, I'm not really sure. So therefore, I need to find that person not guilty.
Yes. And so that essentially that's the case, and we end up at the jury delivering their verdict, which we will watch the little clip of that in a moment. Now, it's one of those things, like, there's so much misinformation in this case. Like, you can listen to a podcast or watch something on this, and you'll hear so many different things. Now, one thing that I heard over and over, like, when I first kind of started listening to stuff about it, is that a lot of people said the key reason that she was found not guilty was because the prosecution overcharged. And, like, I'm talking about reliable people. Like there was like Jim Clemente, who's an ex FBI agent. A lot of time you'll see him pop up on documentaries and that like that. So you know he's the kind of person who should know. And he went like on the night that the verdict was released, he went on CNN or something. And you know they said, how did this happen? Like he's like the prosecution overcharged. They only charged her with capital murder, and this jury couldn't bring themselves. But that's patently false, and I can tell you it's false because we're about to watch the jury's verdict, where they go through all the different counts they find her not guilty on. So that isn't true, and it amazes me that that's something that's been spread around so much that because yes, they did charge her with capital murder, but the jury was given several other counts. You know, all the way down to, I think, criminal neglect or something. We'll see in a second. So you can be for sure that is not the case. Now, where are we? Here we are. Just get that back up. Here we go.
Will the defendant rise along with counsel? Madam Clerk, you may publish the verdicts.
Judge. In the Circuit Court for the 9th Judicial Circuit in and for Orange County, Florida, State of Florida versus Casey Marie Anthony. As to case number 2008 CF 15606-0. As to the charge of first-degree murder, verdict as to count 1, we the jury find the defendant not guilty, so say we all, dated at Orlando, Orange County, Florida, on this 5th day of July, 2011, signed foreperson. As to the charge of aggravated child abuse, verdict as to count 2, we the jury find the defendant not guilty. So say we all, dated at Orlando, Orange County, Florida, this 5th day of July, 2011, signed foreperson. As to the charge of aggravated manslaughter of a child, verdict as to count 3, we the jury find the defendant not guilty. So say we all, dated at Orlando, Orange County, Florida, this 5th day of July, 2011, signed foreperson. As to the charge of providing false information to a law enforcement officer, verdict as to count 4. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of providing false information to a law enforcement officer as charged in the indictment. So say we all, dated Orlando, Orange County, Florida, this 5th day of July, 2011, signed foreperson. As to the charge of providing false information to a law enforcement officer, verdict as to count 5. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of providing false information to a law enforcement officer as charged in the indictment. So say we all, dated Orlando, Orange County, Florida, this 5th day of July, 2011, signed foreperson. As to the charge of providing false information to a law enforcement officer, verdict as to count 6. We, the jury, find the defendant We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of providing false information to a law enforcement officer as charged in the indictment. So say we all, dated Orlando, Orange County, Florida, this 5th day of July, 2011, signed foreperson. As to the charge of providing false information to a law enforcement officer, verdict is to count 7. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of providing false information to a law enforcement officer as charged in the indictment. So say we all, dated Orlando, Orange County, Florida, this 5th day of July, 2011, signed foreperson.
Madam Clerk, you may poll the jury.
Yes. Juror number 1, were these your true and correct verdicts? Pardon? Juror number 1, were these your true and correct verdicts? Not guilty. Were they all your true and correct verdicts? Yes. Juror number 2.
We probably don't need to watch any more of that, but
Yeah, they're just gonna poll them.
yeah, they're just gonna poll them. So let's cue this next one.
If you want to make
Oh, shut up. So that's basically where the trial and that ends.
passive income online,
So what? I actually at this point, any kind of thoughts you have?
It's surprising, it's definitely surprising. Certainly without looking, we haven't gone through all of the trial.
Yep.
And but based on what is there, I do find it surprising, and it sounds like everyone was surprised. I think she was surprised as well.
I think so too. I think you can see it on her
Mhm.
face. Like I think she was braced for at least one of those charges to be guilty.
Mhm.
And I mean, you can obviously see the relief on her face when she's found not guilty of capital murder.
Yes.
But yeah, I feel like you can, she's like, well, it's probably going to be yeah. So I don't think anyone could believe it. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
So the last clip I want to watch is this is a short interview that one of the jurors did. I have no idea why you would want to put your face and your name to this, but juror number 3 apparently did. So, but I think it's interesting because I found some of the stuff that she said in there to be quite telling on the fact that like she did not understand what was asked of her, and I'd be interested to see what you think. Well, I might put the volume on.
Where tonight, for the first time, you will hear from a juror in the Casey Anthony trial. In an exclusive interview, this woman, previously known only as juror number 3, gives us a first-hand account of the secret deliberations that led to yesterday's stunning verdict. Jennifer Ford is her name. She's 32 years old, training to become a nurse. And she tells us the first vote in that jury room was 10-2 for not guilty on first-degree murder. And tonight she takes us inside those deliberations.
See, I find that amazing even, that the very first polling was 10-2. Like, majority of them found her not guilty straight up. And there was just 2 that they had to convince.
Why?
That is pretty
Why?
amazing. I mean, considering, what everyone else was thinking
Yes.
and thinking, she was guilty, based on, certainly the way that she was behaving and the fact that her daughter was missing for an entire month and she didn't say anything to anyone. So it is surprising that it would land on a 10-2.
Mm.
They must have all seen something.
They must have, but yeah, and that's what I just
Yeah.
find like fascinating in that there's seemingly so many obstacles to get over to get to not guilty, but straight off the bat, before any discussions, most of them are like, oh yeah, she's not guilty. Like, it's which just makes me like, and then the fact that those 2 could be, because what it was 10 or 11 hours of deliberation, so they've gone 10 people believe she's not guilty, 2 believe she's guilty, but in a matter of 10 or 11 hours, those 2 people that thought she was guilty were able to be overturned. Like, it just feels like we do not want to be here anymore. I'm not going to and the 2 guilty people are like, I'm not going to convince those 10 she's guilty, so yeah, fuck it. Let's go home, guys.
Yeah, I think, well, being in a jury deliberation's difficult. I've done it myself.
Mm-hmm.
And, it is tough to, because you're going to have people who are going to think just like this, like a 10-2 or, some other breakdown where, they can be very determined in keeping that decision.
Yep.
And so it is difficult to be in that room, and because you haven't had the opportunity to talk at all.
Yep.
So the first time that you are starting to talk about it is when you get in there to do it, and it can be difficult, especially after a really long trial.
Mm-hmm.
And you think like, okay, well, this makes sense to me. This is the verdict that makes sense to me. And then for someone else to have the opposite one, you're like, well, shit, what am I going to do now? So there's definitely, there's difficult discussion that happens there too.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that insight. That you have been on a jury. So perhaps I'm being a little bit harsh on our jury here. So certainly as we watch this, I'd be keen for any other insights you have, because I am a bit harsh on this jury, I must admit.
I get it.
Why did you and the other jurors acquit Casey Anthony of murdering her daughter?
There wasn't enough evidence. There wasn't anything strong enough to say exactly. I don't think anyone in America could tell us exactly how she died. If you put even just the 12 jurors in one room with a piece of paper, write down how Caylee died, nobody knows. We'd all be guessing.
But that's not enough to acquit someone. Like, I mean, if a lot of the time, if you're at the point where, you know, it's gone through to trial, you're not going to know for sure, because they are considered, like, you know what I mean? If it's known for sure, they're probably going to they're going to plead guilty. Like, yep, you got me dead to rights. Like, it can't just be enough to say, oh, well, you know, I don't know exactly how this happened, so I can't convict.
We have no idea.
So it's cause of death that was a problem?
How can you punish someone for something if you don't know what they did?
The prosecution wasn't able to give you a solid enough picture of how Caylee died.
Do you see that picture? I have no idea what it, like, they didn't even paint a picture for me to consider.
You think that this might have been an accident, that she might have drowned in the pool? You believe the defense on that?
I'm not saying that. I'm saying it's a lot easier to get to that conclusion. I can walk from here to there and make it happen. But the chloroform, I'm all over the place. I have no idea. I'm in a maze. I don't know where I'm at. I don't know where the end is. I'm not even quite sure where I began with the chloroform. So I can't get from beginning to end, A to B, to see what even happened. I can't make it work.
When you all went to deliberate this case, were you...
And see, it's stuff like that. Like, and I do agree. I think the chloroform really fucked stuff over. Like, I think it was confusing for the jury. I don't think it really had any, like, even if it wasn't confusing, like, I don't think it got you anywhere. Like, you know, because I think it's hard to believe that that she was using chloroform. Like, I think it's much easier to believe that she was using Xanax, something that she had access to, and that is obvious. Like, I mean, it's, and for things like, you know, searches like how to make chloroform. I mean, if I'm sitting on a jury and looking at Casey Anthony, I'm not believing she's going to follow a recipe on how to make chloroform, for fuck's sake. Like, I mean, it was stupid. So I agree with that. Yeah. But essentially, she's saying, I couldn't understand the chloroform, so I can't convict. Well, could you understand the duct tape wrapped around the skull? You know, could you understand any of the other evidence? Like, just because you can't get behind one piece of evidence doesn't mean, oh, well, you know, you've lost me now.
Unanimous from the start, or...?
No. Oh, no.
Really?
No, I mean, a lot of people, I mean, I don't know, I don't really want to speak for everyone else, but there were a lot of conflicting ideas, and some people were like, you know, I feel like she did, but there's just not enough to substantiate it. Some people were just like, nope, she didn't do it. Like, they have nothing for me to even have any idea what happened. And I did hear someone say, you know, we're from Pinellas County, we didn't have that emotion and that, whatever. That means we have no bias, we're just looking at the facts. And the facts, when you don't have that emotional connection, they don't prove anything. Like, I'm still confused. I have no idea what happened to that child.
There have been people who said you only deliberated 10 or 11 hours, and that shows you weren't serious.
Oh.
That you didn't really look at the evidence. It's a 31-day trial, or whatever it was, 33-day trial. They say you must not have looked at the evidence.
That's speculation, and you know what? Speculation is not fact. We had a lot of discussions. We started to look through stuff, but none of it, how did she die? If you're going to charge someone with murder, don't you have to know how they killed someone, or why they might have killed someone, or have something, where, when, why, how? Those are important questions that were not answered.
That gets to Casey.
Right.
31 days that she does not report the death or disappearance of her daughter, and she parties.
Right.
And people say that's evidence that she is a killer.
It looks very bad. The behavior is very bad, but bad behavior is not enough to prove a crime.
What did it tell you about her?
Well, if you consider the whole family, they didn't really live in reality. They wanted everything to be happy and everyone to be fine. Even when she, in the jail video, she came up smiling. And she looked happy. She's in jail. Do you think that's how she really feels? I'm guessing not.
Did you believe the defense accusation that this was a family that had incest in it, that Casey had been molested by her father or brother?
I have nothing to substantiate that. So no, I mean, If
That
you don't
played
prove
no
it,
role in your deliberations?
no. If you don't prove it, I'm not going to just because I hear it. No, that's not a factor.
What did you make of George Anthony's testimony?
He did not help the state's case.
Why?
Because he was clearly dishonest.
He was dishonest?
Yes.
How?
Well, he was evasive, number one. His story seemed to change depending on, like they said, initially he was on the defense's side, so he would, fight with Mr. Ashton and not give straight answers. But then he switched to the prosecution side, and then now he won't give the defense straight answers. It's all, what do you mean? And can you ask a question again? And I don't, clearly you can follow a logical conversation and respond. Like, he acted like he just couldn't understand what was going on. It was clear to me that he was just being difficult. He didn't want to answer questions, and if it didn't help the prosecution's case, he was going to try and just, I don't recall with him.
Do you believe George Anthony had something to do with what happened to Caylee? I
don't know if he had anything to do with it, but I think he was there. Him and Casey have something, and the jail videos, again, her mom has all the questions, and George sits there and pats his wife's back, and then he's like, do you have anything else you want to tell me? He's not like, what's going on? He's always like a step back, hands are clean, not too close.
I want to get back to Casey, because she's been the focus of so much attention and interest.
Right, it was her daughter, so.
Casey lies,
yes,
and
she
lies
does.
again, and then she goes out and she leads the high life while her daughter is dead.
Right.
People say that is evidence that this person was capable of killing that child.
Even if that's evidence that she is capable, it doesn't show that she did do it. Do I think she's completely innocent? I mean, I have no idea. I don't have the evidence to say one way or another. I'm not going to accuse her of killing. I have no idea, but we'll just say something happened. At some point, she probably needed medical care, or at least there could be some attempt to save the child's life. That was never made. That bothered me.
If it was an accident.
But that's why, if you believe that, that's why you convict her on one of the lesser charges that are, criminal neglect, or I can't remember exactly what they were, or you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like, that's what the other charges are there for.
In the pool or wherever. How did the child end up in a swamp months later, rotting away?
You deny it, you get rid of it. You don't look at it, you don't think about it, it doesn't exist. It's gone.
You
push it out of your
cover
mind.
up a murder. That's what the prosecution said. It was
You're covering up something. It's not proven that's a murder. You're covering up something. It's either an accident or, nobody knows what it is.
I'm going to press you on this.
Go for it.
Duct tape on a baby in a bag rotting in the woods. Most people look at that, they put two and two together, they say that's a murder.
Well, in our country, unfortunately, we have to prove it. You can't just be like, yeah, that really looks bad. Smells bad, looks bad. I get that. It does. Smells bad, looks bad. I get that. But it's someone else's life, and if I'm wrong and I kill someone else, I can't live with that.
When you're in court as a...
So just to I guess a public service announcement, if you're ever going to murder someone, hopefully you get someone like Jennifer Ford on your jury, because as long as you haven't videotaped you doing the murder and you haven't, been caught screaming, I love murder, I'm going to do it again, she'll probably let you off. So, fingers crossed, guys.
As a juror, you have certain responsibilities.
Correct.
You're here now. Do you think Casey Anthony might have killed her daughter?
Again, it's a possibility. I don't know one way or another. If gut feeling, like I said, I feel like she had something to do with it. I don't know what, and I don't think it's fair to speculate. That's how I feel.
If you feel that she might have killed her daughter, a lot of people might say, how are you going to sleep at night?
I'm going to sleep just fine, because in this country, that's our Constitution. I applied the law. I did the best I could. I tried to make it work. I was reaching. I was trying to, like I said, if they're all three there and no medical attention is given, then that's culpable negligence, failure to provide safety and medical care and things like that. I was trying to go for that, but there's just not enough. It's just stretching and reaching, and there's just not quite enough to get there.
How emotional was it to be a juror in this case?
I mean, there were quite a few people when we got back after the verdict was read. We were in tears.
Why were you crying after you handed down a not guilty verdict on murder?
Not guilty doesn't mean innocent.
How do you feel about that you may have let a woman who murdered her own daughter walk off that charge?
It doesn't feel good. It was a horrible decision to have to make, but I had to do it based on the law.
One thing you hear among the people who followed this trial is that they wanted justice for Caylee. Was there any justice for Caylee here?
It's the way our system works. You can't. I don't, if there was a way to give Caylee justice, if that's what happened, you have to prove what happened, and then I'll give Caylee justice. I can't just do it because I can't. I mean, it's not how it works.
When you left the courthouse after your verdict and you found out the international reaction, anger, fury, people calling you names.
Yep.
What was your reaction?
My reaction is, why be mad at me? The prosecution had to prove it. Why is it my fault that they didn't prove their case? Like, if you give me the evidence, I'm happy to, return a verdict accordingly. But if it's just not there, I'm not going to speculate. I'm not going to be emotional and just charge somebody. I can't do that in good conscience.
How much did the fact that this was a death penalty case weigh on you in the course of the trial and in your deliberations?
Well, it weighs heavily. It's the ultimate. It's the ultimate. Like, it's as big as you can get. It's someone else's life in your hands. So if they want to charge and they want me to take someone's life, they have to prove it. You have to prove it, or else I'm a murderer too, and I'm not any.
Well, no, you're not, because you could have charged her with one of the other ones that wasn't capital murder. Like, what the fuck? Like, you clearly did not understand what she was meant to do.
Better.
What are your thoughts there?
It's pretty shocking that she would go on an interview like that.
Yeah.
It's pretty shocking because I think for a lot of people, they would want to stay anonymous. I'm not going to catch the smoke from the entire world hating me, and, for her to go out there, not even be hidden, not even be, sitting in a shadow, like they had a close up of her face, so I think, and certainly the way that the internet works. I mean, I'm thinking to Making a Murderer on Netflix, and how much emotion was drawn up by the public watching it, and also how they reacted. There were people all over that were making threats against the prosecutor, threats against the investigators, threats against everybody that they could, death threats. So knowing this and how much emotion is brought up in this case, and I think for most people believing that she was guilty, I couldn't imagine showing my face up there with my name, where I live as well.
Yes.
And just it must have just been horrific. So I don't know, what type of fallout she's had in her own personal life. Based on that, that would be pretty difficult.
Absolutely, and I mean, I'm not hoping she's had any fallout or anything like that, but I think she's a fucking idiot. Like, I think she just showed she did not understand what she was there for, and I think that's completely ridiculous to go on and give your name and all that kind of stuff. Like, for what reason? I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan of Jennifer.
I know.
Ford,
Well, certainly, yeah. I can definitely see that, and it is frustrating. Certainly, she doesn't want to speculate, but she also believes that Casey and George has something to do with it. Well, how are you coming to that conclusion then, if you don't want to speculate? So certainly, this could have been something where, like the interviewer was stating, so this was a cause of death issue for you. I think that it's clear, obviously, Caylee was left in a swamp.
Yep.
Cause of death, it can't be, even if she was hit over the head with something, and it didn't break the skull, but if she had external injuries, I should say, you're not going to know that because there's nothing left.
Exactly.
You're not going to be able to see that. Also, with the drowning, I know that there is the issue with what's in the water. They could find that in the bones, if that was possible. Typically you would look at the lungs.
Yep.
You would look at any type of fluid that they ingested. What was happening at the time. A lot of cases where there is a body that is intact, they're going to be able to determine that. What injuries happened after the heart stopped beating versus when they were still alive. And what was the cause of death, things like that. But I think it's very, very clear that she didn't end up there by herself.
Exactly.
And the cause of death was homicide, obviously. There, because the tape that was wrapped around her head. Why was there tape wrapped around her head? For what? What did that do?
Yep. Exactly. So, and you're needing to compare, the evidence that's presented to you, and compare that against any exculpatory evidence that the defense is giving, but also compare it to their story. So, the defense is telling you that it was an accident, and George hid the body. So. Okay, but then so at what point between an accidental drowning that a police officer would not be charged, that a police officer would know that, leaving the body 5 minutes from the house is not a good idea, but at what point do you believe that, if you're believing the defense's story, at what point do you believe that George, between finding her dead body and dumping it, wrapped duct tape around her head? What was the reason that George did that? So you need to be able to reconcile that, or you need to be able to go, cold hard evidence is showing me that this skull had duct tape wrapped around it. I do not believe it was an accidental drowning. Therefore, I don't believe what you're telling me. But they didn't do that.
Correct. And I know it's a tough decision because you do have somebody's life in your hands, right? And you have to think, okay, I can't just say that they're guilty, because up until that moment, they're not guilty.
Yes. Yep.
Up until, so they are not guilty. And so it's tough to just, you don't want to make a flippant decision. You want to make sure that everything, and that's the whole point of deliberation, is to not bully everybody to follow you, but to carefully consider all of the charges and look at what evidence is there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, to me, it's clear based on the way that she's behaving, also the way that Caylee's body was found, and how she had lied so much that she created this entire situation. And they always say that circumstantial evidence is just as good as physical evidence.
Yes.
So, I don't know what they were seeing or what they weren't seeing that they needed in order to get to that beyond a reasonable doubt. But it does seem like, based on the way that she was speaking, was that she had to, in order for her to come to a guilty verdict, she had to have no doubt at all.
I couldn't agree more. That is what I believe she thinks. Like, it would, for her to come to a guilty verdict, it would have to be basically, here is evidence of, Casey committing the murder. Here's a diary entry where Casey says, killed my daughter, can't believe I did it, can't wait to go partying, and Jose would have had to be standing up there going, don't know what to tell you guys, doesn't look good, does it? Like basically her standard, or their standard for guilty, was so incredibly high, I don't think anything could reach it. As I said, unless it was the kind of case where someone was caught dead to rights and they've gone, yeah, you know what, I'm guilty. Like, can I try to make a deal or something? Like, if you're ending up in front of her as or the rest of them as a thing, they're they're not understanding what's been asked of them.
All right.
And I think it
So
sucks,
the jury
you know?
is guilty.
Well, yeah, and I guess that brings me to the main point of, so after these videos and that kind of thing, what one thing or collection of things do you believe led to this outcome?
As far as them coming to a not guilty.
Yes. Yep.
I think it was just simply that they didn't have the cause of death, just like she said, and that the state was not able to outline exactly how she died.
Yep. Yep.
So therefore, they weren't able to find her guilty of murder.
Yep.
And they didn't find her guilty of anything.
that's
not
what
even
does my
manslaughter.
head in.
If they believed that it was an accident, then why not the manslaughter charge?
Exactly. And, that's what I found so infuriating, listening to that juror talk about it, because she says, well, clearly something happened here, but I don't know what. Well, then, use that to try to figure out, okay, clearly something happened here. It's not what they're telling us. We can see this physical evidence. It's manslaughter or something like that. I can understand not going for capital. And I think capital murder is always a really high bar, because you're going to have some people that just can't bring themselves to find someone guilty where they know that they're going to get the death penalty for whatever different reasons people have of that. But that's why the other charges are there. So if you know something happened, it's manslaughter, or it's something else. It's just really bizarre.
Yeah, and certainly, when they're questioning the jury, at first to determine if they would be somebody who could fulfill the role, they're going to ask those questions about the death penalty.
Yep.
They're going to ask what the belief is.
Yep.
Do you believe that because there's certainly going to be people who do not believe that the death penalty should apply ever.
Yes.
And so you wouldn't want that person on a jury, because they would have to walk in there knowing that is on the table, and that is to be considered should it ever get to that step where they're looking at sentencing if she was convicted.
Yep.
So it is complex. And the jury that I was on was also for a death penalty case. So it takes a really long time. And the questionnaire that they give was pretty thorough. And they did want to know a lot of those types of questions. Where do you stand, in those, because you aren't going to want somebody who's going to be either way, whether they say, yeah, if you kill somebody, eye for an eye, you get killed too. I don't care.
Yep.
That also wouldn't be a good person. So it is a high standard. Again, you don't want to just make a flippant decision where in the back of your mind you're like, well, I don't know. The evidence has to speak for itself.
Yep.
And what do you believe? And again, the standard is not to remove all doubt. You cannot remove all doubt.
No.
That is that's impossible, because we weren't there.
Exactly.
You could come up with all kinds of things, just like the defense tried to do with saying that the tape could have come from anywhere. Let's go back to Jodi Arias for a second.
Absolutely.
One of the reasons why they were able to charge first-degree murder against Jodi was because they found the camera.
Yep.
That's what did it. It wasn't the bloody palm print. It wasn't the hair that was stuck to that, because the defense attorney would have been able to explain that away. She was in that home often. There's no way to date when blood was placed somewhere.
Yep.
And the hair, as far as that, because she was in there, her hair could have shed at some point, and during all of the the chaos of the attack of that night, her hair could have floated and literally fell on that. They could have used that as making reasonable doubt an
Yes.
issue.
Yes.
In this case, though, that's essentially what they were trying to do as well by saying, well, you can't tell me how that tape got on her. It could have floated and just landed perfectly. I mean, it's such a ridiculous thing. Obviously, that could have been one of their most difficult pieces of evidence to contest, because they have to well, they don't have to explain anything, but if they're going to, and they're going to try to insert reasonable doubt there, they have to say, well, you don't know where it came from. So they're going to bring on an expert who would be willing to say, yeah, it could have come from anywhere.
Yep.
It didn't, didn't have to be purposely placed by whoever killed her.
That's right. And even if you are prepared to believe the defense witness, which clearly these people were, that it could have just floated there, it got on there. Well, you then need to jump over the bar. Okay, well, how is the jaw still intact? Like, if we're to believe, oh, we're in a swamp, duct tape has floated along and it's landed on her, well, that would be fine, but the jaw would be missing, because the only reason the jaw is still there is because it was held in place while the body was decomposing. But they were able to jump over that really easily.
Yeah. It is pretty remarkable, considering everything that happened, to at least not get something, a conviction of one of the lower charges, considering, everything that she did certainly gives the appearance that she's very much guilty.
Yep. And I mean, my opinion on how this came about, I think it was a complete, I don't think you would ever see this happen again with the same circumstances. I think, it's a combination of Jose did a very good job as a defense attorney. I think the prosecution definitely made mistakes in leaving out key evidence like the foolproof suffocation and that kind of stuff. I mean, that is key evidence, and then also the stuff about the chloroform and all this kind of stuff. But I still think with in most other cases, with the great job that Jose did, with the poor job in some cases the prosecution did, a different jury still comes back with at least one guilty charge. I think this jury was just the most unique blend of people to come to those decisions so quickly. It's quite incredible.
Yeah, it is. I would be interested to know the people who voted guilty first and then decided against that and went to not guilty, because all they would have needed was one person to say, no, I'm not budging.
Exactly. And I'm obviously only making assumptions because I have no way of knowing how that jury worked and that kind of thing. But that's to me, with like the two that started out as guilty and then, not only went away from guilty of capital murder, but couldn't stick by and go, okay, we'll concede that, but I still think she's guilty of this. To do that in such quick time, I just have to believe they didn't want to be there anymore. Like, they had been sequestered for all this time. They wanted to go home, and the further they stuck their foot in the grass and said, no, I'm not budging, the longer this whole process would take. Because it's hard to believe if you're sitting at the stage of I believe she is guilty of murdering her child, and and my vote is for guilty of capital murder, that within the space of 11 hours you can go to not guilty. It's incredible.
It really is. I'd be interested to know what the argument was that was able to get them to shift, so quickly on that. What was something that was said to them that said, you know what, you're right, I can't convict this person when I was thinking that I could.
Yep.
What did they see that these other people didn't see.
Exactly. And, for what it's worth, another juror has come out down the track, was smart enough not to give his name and address, but
Right.
says that, he believes they made they made a mistake, and, it kind of,
Mhm.
he thinks about it every day. So clearly down the track there's been, but unfortunately doesn't really change, anything in the justice stakes, but
No, it doesn't. And that's really unfortunate that he has to consider that all the time.
mm,
Now that he made a mistake, because you probably aren't going to convince 10 other people to
mm,
change their mind. Um, but certainly if he would have just held true to his verdict and what he believed to be the correct one,
mm.
then it would have been a mistrial. They would have tried her again with another group of people.
Yep. That's
Yeah.
right. I mean, that's what I.
Mhm.
That's. I mean, I don't think it. And it definitely would be keen to get more insights, on how you found it being a juror.
Mhm.
Because I definitely don't think it's an easy job, and I'm not trying to be here, being all judgmental and all that kind of stuff, because it's definitely a difficult job. But I think if you take it on, you've got to, I think you have a duty to stick by what you believe, not just cave because it's easier and to get to go home, I guess.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it's a binding decision.
Yep.
Whatever it is that you decide is binding, and it's really important to be sure that you're sticking to your verdict as well. I mean, it is tough to be in front of 10 other people, for example,
Mm.
and have the opposite opinion.
Mm.
And they're looking at you like, why? We've been here for months. Like, what is wrong with you? Like, please,
Yep.
please explain to us what your problem is.
Yep.
So, it is difficult to do that. But it is important to be sure that, you're making the decision that is right for you.
Yep.
And then if you truly believe that she's not guilty, that you cannot convict her based on what was said in that courtroom, then you have to stay with that.
Yep. So did you find it daunting being a juror?
It was sometimes. You know what? It was more boring than I thought it would be.
it's not
It was
like it's not
definitely
like the
more
movies
boring.
make it look.
No, I mean, because the days can be long,
Mm.
and when you're sitting in there, it can start to get a little bit warm.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they turn the lights off and you're watching a 7-hour interrogation, and I mean, I definitely did. I don't know that I didn't fall asleep,
No.
but I dropped my binder because it just fell out of my hands. I think I was kind of, I mean, I wasn't the only one for sure.
Yep.
But it's difficult because, you think like, wow, this is right up my alley. Like, this is really interesting and all of that. But there is a lot because everything has to be put on the record.
Mm-hmm.
So, especially when you're going through physical evidence like blood stains, they have to go through every single one,
Yep.
and get that out there. But so it can be boring
Yep.
at times. So, and it's daunting too because we were there for a few months.
Yeah. Right.
So,
It's a long time.
it's a lot. It's a long time. Yeah. But I would say overall, it was a very good experience. So
Yep.
I don't have any complaints in that regard because I'm usually pretty easygoing, with stuff.
Mm.
I'll just kind of go with whatever's going on.
Yes.
But it's difficult to get to the point of a deliberation and you've got that one person who's like, you're like, God damn it. But yeah, we did end up, it was easy to convict him of what he did.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so he killed 2 people and attempted a third, and he had a couple of other charges on there as well. And so it was kind of easy to get to that point because it was obvious.
Sure.
And then we got to the aggravation phase, which is where the state is going to explain why they're eligible for death.
Mm-hmm.
And that was easy to get passed as well. So everyone voted yes.
Mm-hmm.
And then going to the sentencing phase, which is, either he's going to get life in prison
Mm-hmm.
or he's going to get the death penalty. And so, in going through that, that was the defense's case. That's where they were going to talk about him as a person and everything that led up to from the time he was conceived, literally, until that point of the crime, what happened. And so going through all of that, and, so there's a lot to consider.
Yep.
And when we were deliberating, it took us 4 days. And so when we were deliberating, we started off with an 8-4 vote of death. And then we ended up with 11-1.
Yep.
And that's what we ended up hanging on that, and we couldn't get past it. And so they had a mistrial for the sentencing.
Yes.
And they decided that they were going to retry the sentence, and they did.
Mm-hmm.
And that jury was hung as well. So he's spending the rest of his life in prison.
Okay. So that's interesting. So is it like basically if it hangs twice, then it just goes, or did the prosecution then go, well, look, we'll just go?
Oh, yes. The second time around, then the judge will just sentence him if
Yep.
you don't come to a verdict. Yeah.
Yep. It's interesting that, both, the jury that you were on and then the subsequent one both couldn't,
Mhm.
and I guess that shows what that high bar is for the death penalty,
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. It is a difficult one.
Yep.
And so if you're able to remove, maybe your own personal feeling on something, because nobody wants to kill anybody, right? Well, usually, hopefully,
some people, to be fair, do, but
that is true. Well, he did, right? He wanted to
He-
kill a
he-
few people.
he
Now,
did.
myself, I don't want to kill anybody.
No.
So it's a really difficult thing because you're seeing this person sit in front of you.
Yes.
And you're like looking at them like, I could send you to death row. Now, whether or not he ends up getting death is very unlikely.
Mm-hmm.
He'll probably live out, his life there because there's so much litigation that happens.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, it is a tough decision, for sure. But looking at what the law is and what the standard is, it wasn't that it wasn't a no-brainer for me,
Yep.
but it made sense to me. That what the mitigation that was presented wasn't enough. It just wasn't.
Yep. And so for you, was it about being, pragmatic and looking at the standards and that, and, removing emotion and that kind of thing? Like, this is the job you're being asked to do is this. So it's not, you're, if so as a juror, if you reach, for death or not, like, it's not, you're not the one, it's the person's actions that are leading to you. They're not, not like,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, it's not a feeling like that. Certainly, for somebody who, if there's somebody who believes that you can't do that, you can't sentence anybody to death, then certainly they're going to have that mindset of, well, I'm going to vote no.
Yep.
You can't do it. But, in looking at what the law said, what the standard was that the state had to meet, and also the lack of mitigation, that could explain why you would give somebody mercy in
Yes.
that case. It was something that made sense to me. It made sense to most people, but again, we started with 8-4, and then when we came back the next day, I believe we had a weekend, and then we came back the next time, and 3 others said, "I have to agree."
Yep.
Based on what was being said. They just didn't want to make that decision right then
Yep.
because it felt too fast. They wanted to really consider everything And they did that. And so 3 came back and said, yeah. And it's tough. There, a lot of people cried.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they don't want to do it. They can see either themselves or somebody that they know in the defendant.
Yep.
And they're like, yeah, this is a person still. They did horrible things. But this is still a person. And when you hear about their life and all of the things that led up to the day, you know, that they ruined somebody else's life or an entire family, then, you know, it is a tough decision. It's not one that's made lightly at all.
No, absolutely. You know, and that's, you know, people's empathy and that, isn't it? Like, it's everyone. You try to put yourself in another person's place, and if you're not that kind of person, you can't understand how you could ever do that. Like, it's well, that's I've actually found that more interesting than Caylee. You know, your insight to what it's like to be on a jury. Maybe we should have done 5 videos on that.
Right. Well, you know what? I think it would be really interesting at some point, because I am going to be moving. But when I do, I think it would be interesting to look at that particular case, because it's very interesting.
Fantastic. Well, let's do
Yeah.
that. Let's
Okay.
put a pin in it, that they say. So at the appropriate time, let's do that, because I do think that case is fascinating, and
Yeah.
and
It's
that
really
combined
good.
with your insight as to being a juror, I think that'll be brilliant. It'll be much better than anything involved in Caylee. I can tell you that much.
Yeah. Right. Well, she's out living her best life, isn't she?
She is, and you know, she's now changed that Bella La Vida, whatever it was, tattoo now. So it doesn't say you know, beautiful life anymore, and she's a photographer, apparently, and living with one of the old dudes that worked on her case, which I'm sure that, you know, that is all above board. So
I'm sure it is. Why wouldn't it be?
I mean, I feel silly for suggesting anything otherwise.
Right. Yeah.
Before we get to kind of wrapping up on that, can I just tell you what you and the rest of your jury did wrong?
Sure, absolutely. Please do.
You deliberated for more than 11 hours. That's the
We
cutoff.
did deliver.
You should have just gone, you know what? we're just going not guilty and we're going home.
We're just gonna do not guilty at this point. Can we go home? Yeah, I know.
Yeah, so we're pretty much at the end of the Caylee thing now. We will do one more episode, which will be looking at just snippets of her documentary that we find interesting, especially in terms of how the story's changed now and all that kind of stuff. But we'll have one more episode, and then we can leave Caylee behind, which I must say I'm happy to do. I think I have exhausted myself on this woman.
Yeah.
So any kind of final thoughts before we wrap this one up?
No, it's a wild ride, certainly, going through this one, because there's so much going on, and it's really, really sad. You know, Caylee didn't have a chance to live, and you know, I know that when there's a trial, a lot of times we talk about, you know, having justice for the victim.
Yep.
But it's not, there's never any justice. I mean, she's not alive. So how can there be an answer to that? And, you know, because the system is meant for punishment, you know, it's finding punishment. A lot of times it just doesn't seem enough, but certainly when there's no punishment, that is what I think stings so much more.
Yes.
For everybody, you know, who's thinking, you know, the focus is lost a lot of times from a victim, because it is focused on the person who's the defendant, the one who's in court, because that's what's happening now. So that's where all the attention is given. But it's incredibly sad that Caylee never had a chance to live. Whatever decision was made for her life to end, it certainly didn't have to. And it's kind of like looking at these types of situations, where if somebody didn't want their child anymore. And there's so many of those cases, like even with Chris Watts, for example, he didn't have to do what he did.
No.
It never is that way. It's a permanent solution to a temporary problem. So whether, that's that Casey feels overloaded, she doesn't feel supported by her family. She's also incredibly selfish.
Yep.
But the solution cannot be, well, I just have to get rid of my daughter.
Exactly. And Casey had two very involved parents, and they had at different times said that they were going to go for custody. So if this was all too much for her, Casey simply could have said, I am relinquishing, my parental rights to you. But that's, for whatever reason, with her makeup, with how selfish she is, or whatever it is. Like, I'm not getting into armchair psychologist here, but for whatever reason, she couldn't do that. Like, it wouldn't either, she would feel that the support would run out if that was the case, or she couldn't. Yeah, but and unfortunately, that has led to a little girl no longer being here. And I think you made a really good point just before, where you said, in trials and that, the victim tends to get forgotten about. Like, the focus is on the perpetrator or the alleged perpetrator and that kind of thing. And that's definitely what's happened in this case. It's all about Casey, which is, for, one small thing, like, that's, why we've chosen to title these episodes The Death of Caylee Anthony, rather than, the trial of Casey Anthony, because Casey gets more than enough attention, whereas little Caylee doesn't, unfortunately. So
yeah.
So I think that's probably I won't say a nice place, but a decent place to leave that off. So thank you very much to anyone that's listened. I hope this has been been interesting. Thank you, as always, for joining me for these, and thank you for the insights you shared into the kind of jury system and that kind of thing. That's incredibly interesting, and it'll be more interesting when we get to that case down the track. So thank you very much.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you so much.
All right, guys, we will be back next week for one last look at this smiling, laughing young woman that you see before you. So, bye, guys.